Hello everybody and welcome back again to another of our live events this evening. The first event this afternoon was with Ian McCartney, and so I just want to say another thank you to him. This event is going to be with Tom Abbott, who is the mastermind behind the OH expedition. He's an old friend of mine, and I'm really excited to invite him to speak with us today. A quick note on my previous event. I'm really sorry for the sound quality at my end. It's the first time I've done this, the first time I'd gone live, so it wasn't the worst that it could have been, but I apologise, and I apologise to Ian. I think I'm going to try and invite in Tom into the conversation now, but as before, we'll see how that goes. So he's loading up now. Thank you all for joining me, by the way. Aha!
Hello.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Joe.
How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm very, very good. Where are you?
I'm in the middle of Wales. I'm in the middle of nowhere, Wales.
It looks beautiful where you are.
It is lovely. It's mizzling slightly, but it's pretty special.
It looks fantastic. It looks slightly, well, we're in a very sunny Dundee at the moment, but
I came here especially for the backdrop. I came all this way for this particular conversation.
I'm glad you're taking it seriously.
Yes.
Brilliant.
I always go the extra mile, Joe, as you know.
You certainly do. So Tom, again, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
So I would just like to start, for the benefit of anyone who isn't already familiar with the project. Can you just talk a little bit about the OH and why you did the project as well?
Yes, of course. So the OH is an acronym for the Outer Hebrides. It wasn't originally called the OH. It became the OH when I decided early on that I was just going to stick to the Outer Hebrides rather than an initial plan was to kind of travel around all the Hebrides, so the Inner Hebrides, etc. Now the idea came about 6 months before I left, so it would have been October of 2018. I was staying with my family on the Isle of Mull, and we had this incredible time. And on the car journey on the way back to Bristol, it was at the time, I was thinking about how I could come back and spend more time in the islands. And initially, it was simply, I felt that it was something that I needed on a personal level. I always loved the Hebrides, and I always had this kind of romantic notion of spending a lot of time by myself in a beautiful place. And so it was kind of initially that, and then I started to look into, when I got home, I looked up the Schools Hebridean Society. And the Schools Hebridean Society was founded by my dad back in 1961. And it was him and some other friends, other kind of teachers, loved the Hebrides and felt that young people, sort of students, particularly inner city students, needed more exposure to wild places. And so they kind of picked the Hebrides because it is wild, it is completely out there, but it's also within fairly easy reach of mainland UK. And so between 1960 and 1989, the Schools Hebridean Society led something like 200 expeditions to the islands, and this was a part of my dad's story that I was always really interested in. Now, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 4 or 5 years ago, and I, being a writer myself and being a kind of somebody who kind of tries to think creatively, I thought it would be an interesting opportunity for a writing project to kind of return to those islands where he had spent his youth and all these kind of decades before me and my brothers came along, because actually my dad's quite an old dad, and so I'd had this whole life before us. And the thing that interested me most about that life before us was his trips to the Hebrides. And so I thought, well, why don't I turn this kind of into this writing project and see what I can kind of garner from visiting the islands on the themes of kind of memory and things like that, and my relationship with my dad and all these things. And it just kind of snowballed from there, I suppose.
And my understanding is you kind of, once you were in the Hebrides, you were kind of setting yourself up. You weren't kind of moving all the time. You were kind of setting yourself up in a base camp and exploring kind of little pockets of the islands like that. Is that correct?
That is correct, but that I had no idea that was going to happen. So the only plan I had, so I'd initially planned to spend a year in the Hebrides, and the only plan I had was to walk the Hebridean Way when I got there. And for those who don't know, the Hebridean Way is a walking route through the Western Isles / Outer Hebrides. Outer Hebrides is known as the Western Isles as well. From south, well, you can do it from north to south or south to north. I did it from south to north. I'd never done a long distance walking trail. I'd always walked when I was younger, but never really kind of camping overnight and continuing on the next day. So I thought it'd be a really good way to kind of get used to the weight of my pack for a start, and just to kind of get a kind of glimpse of the islands. And anyway, so the night before I got into Stornoway, which is the end of the Hebridean Way, I realized that I just kind of wanted to go back to the start, but actually spend much more time there. And because of Scotland's right of access, freedom to roam, you can camp in any one place for up to 3 nights as long as you leave no trace, and all those kinds of things. And so that's what I did. I went back to the beginning. I went back to Vatersay and I started setting up base camps. So I would pitch my tent and I would wander off for the day and do the same thing the next day and the same thing the next day, and just kind of be very open-minded and see what I kind of encountered and write about it, and kind of write down any memory that I had, and just all these things. And so the base camps provided me, I suppose in some ways it provided me a home. It provided me a home on what was quite for me quite an extreme thing to do. Somewhere to return to at the end of every day.
Yeah. And I guess you must have developed a very close attachment to that small collection of belongings that you had when you were out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very attached to everything. I mean, my tent had a name and things like that. But also I was also very wary of how my belongings and my things began to kind of break down with time as well. That was kind of quite an anxiety inducing thing to see. You get all this equipment and hope that it will be, enough to kind of last for a year, but general wear and tear happens, and it starts to unnerve you slightly.
Yeah. And sorry, go on.
No, you go on.
I was going to say that part of the thrill is maybe not the right word, but the interesting thing about following the project, as you were documenting it, was seeing the kind of physical transformation you went through. You ended up looking kind of sunbeaten and bearded and stuff. Is that something you were kind of aware of was happening to you as you were traveling?
Yeah, I was aware of it because, I was able to do this by I crowdfunded to kind of support me to do it, and so a lot of people had kind of helped me do this, whether it was financially or spiritually or all sorts of things. And so I felt a certain kind of duty to kind of keep a kind of online diary. So I was really doing kind of the social media thing. And so I was aware of how I looked, and I was aware of how I was thinking day to day, because I was sharing it with so many people. So yeah, I was kind of aware of that process of kind of becoming this sort of bedraggled. I sort of had this thing where I wasn't going to shave at all for a year. just it was kind of just a personal challenge, I suppose, and it sort of obviously played into the whole wild man wandering around some islands kind of look, which I was quite happy with. But I think in many ways the kind of social media aspect of it and having communication with people who are following the journey and people who had done it before was what helped me get through get through the thing.
And what was the writing process when you were out there?
The writing process was I was quite easy on myself, and the only kind of rule I had was to write in my diary every day. Whether that was a sentence, whether that was 10 pages. I look through my diaries now because the way that I'm presenting the trip again a year later is that I am referring to my diaries, and there's a lot of kind of I've written a lot of prompts to things, the things I had an idea that I really wanted to expand on, but maybe didn't have the time or the energy, so I just write a little thing saying, write more about sheep.
Insert sheep here.
Yeah, but I had this kind of fascination. Sheep are everywhere, and I discovered that most of the coastal paths there's paths everywhere, but they're not made by humans. They're made by sheep, and there would be paths along very kind of precipitous sort of parts of islands, and I knew that it was safe to follow them because a sheep had obviously made those, and I felt kind of indebted to sheep kind of everywhere I went. They were like sheep as kind of pathfinders. So I remember writing in my diary, write more about sheep as pathfinders. And it is something that I've done since, and it's something that I want to include in the project because I felt I owed a massive debt to sheep in a way that I never thought I would have never would have before. I just knew that if there was a path there that had been made by the sheep, it would be a safe place to walk.
And how are you so you are picking up those threads now? Do you think,
I am picking up those threads. Yeah, absolutely. They're all sort of happening on the page, and they're all going to be going into the project. But at the time when I was writing these things, I was also slightly worried that maybe I was just going insane and just imagining things that weren't really true. But actually, a year on saying it makes sense.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to kind of touch on is the Hebrides have this kind of tradition of this connection with writers, and certainly in the last few years we've had the Outrun and Love of Country and the Old Ways, these writers who've gone to the Outer Hebrides as a retreat to write. Did you feel kind of connected to that group of writers at all?
I mean, I felt particularly connected to Robert Macfarlane because I don't think I would have had the kind of interest in nature and exploration and adventure if it wasn't for reading his books. But actually, he followed me on Instagram, and he sent me messages of encouragement and things like that, and I knew I was kind of walking in territory that he had written about in these books that had, for me, were kind of just incredible works of non-fiction or works of art in some ways. And so I was aware of kind of him following me on Instagram. I was always kind of slightly aware of that. But also Raina Wynn, who wrote The Salt Path, and she'd walked kind of the Southwest Coast Path. She had been part of the Instagram journey as well, and so I was aware of those writers because they were actually there on the journey as well. But and then I met this guy through my friends James and Fiona, who lived in Uig in Southwest Lewis, and the house he had was actually where Madeline Bunting had written Love of Country, and James Rebanks had written A Shepherd's Tale, Shepherd's Life. And he knew Rob Macfarlane and all this stuff. So it just kind of kept coming up. And so I felt that they were there, but at the same time, I didn't feel that I had to kind of deliver on the kinds of levels that they do. I felt quite comfortable just writing a diary and and sort of sort of putting on hold actually writing the actual thing until I got back. I was worrying about all that would come later. So I just wrote I just kept the diary and kept faith in the diary.
It's quite nice, the idea there's this person out there who's kind of been at the intersection of all these different books that kind of are about wildly different things, but kind of have this central point to pass through.
Yeah, really absolutely. Yeah.
And something that something you mentioned to me before, once you finished, was that you kind of, am I right in thinking you got a bit of a reputation around the island? Like people kind of were aware that you were there and started kind of spotting you and that sort of thing. Is that true?
Yeah, no, it is there were a few situations where people would see me on the side of the road and pull up and say, "Oh, you're Tom Abbott, you're doing this thing, and let me give you a ride, or let me give you a place to stay," and things like that. And that was a lovely thing. I mean, that was social media really through and through. And people do visit the Outer Hebrides, and tourism is a large part of their kind of income, but it's still very few people. And in terms of the people that live out there, that you'd be seeing the same people. I noticed it early on that I was seeing the same people all the time, and so you do get to know almost everyone just by sight. But then, through Instagram and through Facebook, I met people who had been following what I was doing and wanted to say hi and wanted to have a drink or something like that, which was lovely. It was really lovely, because particularly the last few months where it got really hard, I sort of needed that extra lift.
Yeah, I wonder if you're able to talk about that last stretch. Like, it sounds like it got really rough.
Yeah, I can talk about it. It's pretty hard to sum up, because I think it kind of crept up on me without me realizing it. Probably for a month or two, it was sort of there. And I sometimes I think about it in terms of like a relationship. So you have this so-called kind of honeymoon period where everything is amazing and everything is new, and you just kind of want to bathe in this kind of blissful kind of newness. And it was like that for like 3 months. It really was like that for a few months. Even when I was tired, even when I was weary, I still wanted to find a new place to camp. I still wanted to discover a new part of the island. But then that kind of slowly started to shift, and there were a couple of things, like my tent being initially just damaged in a storm and then being destroyed completely, which and I developed all these other physical things. So I developed tendonitis in my knees because of carrying the pack. And the weather was changing, so it was a pretty bad summer. So I got there in the spring, and the spring was incredible, and then the summer got a bit weird. But yeah, so it was a combination of things that made it that much harder for me to have the kind of the excitement of going out to find a new place to camp, or so in those first few months, I could quite easily go a week, 10 days without seeing anyone. That didn't faze me whatsoever. But then by the end, I couldn't go a day without seeing anyone. Like, I needed people around me. I lost it. I lost that kind of, that thrill and that excitement. And, it still saddens me now, but actually it feels like a complete experience or something. Because even though it got bad, in that sense, I was also able to see things not through rose-tinted spectacles and actually write about the places without this kind of overly romantic kind of way, and actually just in a much more kind of objective, much more mature way, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like, you know, my early diaries are just filled with, oh, it's amazing, it's amazing, it's amazing. I was just running out of words to say. But then it got to this kind of lovely point where I could kind of write about what I did like and what I didn't like about whatever. And I think that was in that time where it was getting hard, I was also seeing most clearly.
I suppose
Yeah,
it also
I suppose.
enables you to have a conclusion to the journey. It's the end
Yeah.
of the journey is not just, and then I went home because it was time to go home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel like it came to a kind of natural conclusion in that sense?
I feel it came to a natural conclusion because I did go through those various phases, and that gave me a much more full experience. And as you know, and as I suppose some people watching this will know, I didn't stay for the whole year as intended. I did have conversations with myself about whether my body could take it, but also my sanity. You know, I felt like I couldn't. But basically, I realized I couldn't do the whole year living the way that I was, and I kind of needed to reduce that. So I reduced it to 7 months, and I did this 7 months. But I had to have that whole experience. You know, I couldn't have left after 3 months during that honeymoon period because I feel like I would never have seen the islands properly. And in seeing the islands properly, I needed to feel as though I'd kind of lived there. And in order to kind of live and to actually be in a place, you have to go through the honeymoon period, and you have to go through this kind of next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I think 7 months gave me enough time to be able to kind of see things in those different lights.
Yeah. And so once you came back, and what you're doing now is this process of, you mentioned it earlier, kind of remapping the journey through Instagram. And how is that process affecting you? How is that to do?
Well, I mean, I got back at the beginning of November of 2019, and I immediately started to write and to try and kind of make sense of these diaries and these journals, and I was trying lots of different things, and I kept thinking that I had found something, but then thought, no, this doesn't feel right, and this kind of just went on forever. And it's part of the process of writing, is you kind of have to just try a million things before you kind of hit something that feels right. And I got to this. The coronavirus happened. Coronavirus happened, and suddenly thought, everything is. This gives me an opportunity to kind of really slow down and not give myself any kind of deadlines or anything like that, and just think about the progression of the journey in a much more settled, slower state. And then it got to March the 31st, which was the day that I went to the Hebrides. And it just started with one post. I posted, I think, the ferry leaving Oban, and wrote just a kind of a sentence. And then I was like, I'm just going to do this every day. So I'm just going to share a photo from that same day last year and write something. Hi, James. and write something. Like a memory of that day, along with a photo, and just post the same thing every day. But what that enabled me to do was to think about things in a much more kind of, in some ways, a more real-time kind of way, but kind of a year on. And I'm trying things out. You know, I've been trying things out since the start. So it started off as just being kind of a sentence, like a memory with a photo. And then I started to take things from my diaries and things like that. And it's enabled me to kind of distill the whole journey into something that feels more ready to kind of go to the next stage, which will be writing a book. And you know, including a lot of the stuff that I've put. But you know, for me, there are posts where the photo says everything it needs to say, and there's no need for text. And there are other situations where the text and the photo just say the same thing. And so I'm going to go through kind of everything, get rid of stuff, add stuff, but it is going to be presented like a photo essay. But that has only come about through this kind of trial thing that I've been doing on Instagram. Because I think the kind of visual thing, the photo thing, was very important to my particular journey. And it would be, I feel I'd be letting down a whole side to the journey, which was this social media side where I was sharing photos and things like that, if I didn't include those. So it's, the whole book is just looks very different now, and that is thanks in being able to do it this way, but also just having the whole day to think about that particular, and I take notes every day. I'm like, oh, what else do I remember from that, which I maybe haven't put into my post? And so it's just building and building, and it's this mixture of memory and diary entries and photography, which are the kind of the three things I really want to kind of marry together into this kind of this product. I can't believe I just said that. You can tell I used to be a fucking bookseller. Yeah.
So this process, this new process, is that also going to be woven into the product, into the book, or like, because like you said, because of your father and because of the nature of the project, memory in itself is quite an important concept. Like, is part of the project. Is this remapping process going to form part of the text eventually, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can't say exactly how it's going to form that, because I want memory and the way that we remember things, and particularly how the most important thing was particularly how landscape kind of inspired certain memories I had of kind of walking as a child with my dad or with my brothers and my family and all those sorts of things. I want that to be all in there, but I don't want it to be too complicated. I want it to kind of read quite easily. I want it to kind of read in a way that just walking through a landscape feels to somebody. So whilst I want to deal with all those topics, I want to do so in a way that feels kind of accessible. And yeah.
So another kind of concept that comes up once or twice in the writing that I've read.
I didn't mean to make a face then. I was adjusting my glasses. It's just something I do.
I didn't like the sound of that question. So you talk about evidence, and you talk about evidence as kind of, whether that's the physical evidence of your presence with your belongings in the OH, or you being the evidence of your parents' love and that sort of thing. Are you able to kind of expand a little bit for us on how evidence is come about in your writing?
Well, it's funny because it was when we talked earlier, and you talked about this kind of idea of evidence. I hadn't really picked up on it really within the kind of what I'm writing, but I do think about this evidence. And in fact, I think the post today that I did was this kind of pile of stones that I'd sort of built at Renish Point, South Harris, which I'd kind of left. I sort of left this cairn. I wanted to kind of leave something, even though they say leave no trace. I can leave a fucking cairn. It's fine. I think. And there are other things where I kind of did that as well. And there was this time where I was in South Uist when I was just kind of camping, and I was thinking about, and it is written in there. I was thinking about, if I were to die here, what could somebody kind of figure out about me from what I had left? And I suppose Yeah, I suppose I don't really know how it feels like it feels really important, this
Mm,
idea of evidence and looking through the landscape for evidence of my dad, for example. You
mm,
know, and often the evidence would be that I would meet somebody on the side of the road and I'd tell them what I was doing there, and they'd say, "Oh, I remember this expedition from, you know, the 60s or 70s," and, you know, they would remember my dad and things like that, so that there was this sort of evidence there of his journey. So in some ways I was sort of playing detective a bit, but then I was also keen, I think, because so much of it is about this kind of father son relationship. I've always been in kind of awe of my dad, and he's always been this kind of big sort of figure. But I always felt that in some ways I needed to kind of come out of his shadow, and maybe part of that was it was kind of leaving my own sort of evidence, and whether that's a, you know, a pile of stones somewhere or whether it's a book, you know, it's this kind of just proof that I was there. And I suppose it's something that memory can't erase. You know, a book is there, or a piece of art is there, or something like that, cannot be erased by memory. It's always there, and so it kind of which goes into to the Alzheimer's thing and things like that. You know, I think about the kind of the evidence that my dad has left throughout his life, and for me, my brothers, and my family, and for others, and even though he can't remember anything, he is surrounding us with all of this kind of evidence of his life, and that is how that for me, that is how we die, and that is how we continue to live through evidence. And so I suppose it is maybe sort of in that territory as well.
wow. So, and so what happens when you reach the end of this remapping journey? This when you get, is it what's 210 days in total, or 230?
It's 210 days, and I think I'm about 130 or something. So,
Okay.
uh, well, what happens for me then is that I stop posting every day on Instagram, and I, the book, because of doing this, the shape of the book is it's forming in my mind, like, big time. Like I kind of know exactly. My
It's,
son,
yeah,
yeah.
funnier than he has ever been.
um, I'll write the book. You know,
Yeah.
I feel this has provided me with kind of almost exactly how I want to approach it. When I say almost exactly, I don't want people to think that it's going to look like it does on Instagram. It's not, but that is informing the whole thing. There is going to be a lot of play between text and photography, and kind of maybe kind of some found items from the trip, maybe kind of old maps, that will kind of show the journey itself, the kind of the literal journey that I took, but it will show kind of other journeys as well, and will be something that will be nice to look at. You know, just I just want it to be that, really. But yeah, I mean, by doing it this way, it's given me a much clearer idea of what the end piece of work is going to look like,
Yeah.
and I also just love that I've been able to share it with people, and a lot of the people who follow me on Instagram were people that were there through the actual thing happening. And in fact, occasionally I get a message from someone saying, "I can't believe you're out there in the midst of a pandemic doing this thing," and I have to kind of explain that I'm not, that it's that I yeah, that I'm just kind of remembering it a year before. Um, and yeah, and there's people, you know, who followed me and were there, you know, who were literally there, like James and Fiona, who are both on right now, and I'm feeling slightly self-conscious. But yeah, it's to do something that was so, to do kind of self-isolation before it was government mandated, you know, it's like being really by myself and being really lonely. It feels like it's becoming more of a collaborative thing now,
Yeah.
and that feels special.
Mm. And do you
Nice feeling.
still feel, you mentioned before that when you were out there, having the Instagram feed was felt like a kind of support while you're out there. Do you feel like you still have that support, and that it's still kind of guiding the project?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so much of the body of what was happening is something that was shared and people responded to, and I didn't know who these people were half the time, but it felt like I kind of got to know them as it went along, yeah, it's good.
And so the last thing I'm going to ask, if it's all right, Tom, is do you think you're likely to go back at any time?
To the O?
To the O.
I got to go to the I, which is the Inner Hebrides. No, the Outer Hebrides is way better than the Inner Hebrides. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I had a couple visits when I was out there by friends from sort of back from my life. My friend Tessa visited me, and she was making a film about what I was doing out there, and my friend Alex came and stayed with me for a week, and like that was a really, really special experience, being able to share what I had kind of learned from the islands, and not to be kind of a tour guide, although I think I probably kind of took that on a bit, like, because you naturally do, but the idea of going back to the islands with family, or with close friends, and just kind of being in that space again, really, really amazes me. I just want to say something, because like the Gatliff hostels out there, 3 hostels in South Uist, Berneray, and Harris, Renegade. They supported. They gave me a grant. The Gatliff Trust gave me a grant, and they've had to close up for COVID, and they are unique hostels because it's an honesty box, so you put your kind of money into, and the door is open 365 days a year, and for the first time in their history, they're now closed, and that feels really. I think about those kind of these sort of empty hostels now, and it does make me sad, and I hope that they're able to kind of find their feet again once this is all over. But the world now is so different to what it was just if I'd done the full year, in fact, I would probably have had to come home early anyway, because everything had gone into lockdown before the end of the year. But yeah, when I think about the islands now, it's different, and I hope that when I return, it feels a bit more like it was when I was there.
I think that's a great place for us to leave it. Tom, thanks so much for doing this.
It's been a pleasure.
It's really has. It's been so nice to actually break this down a bit and talk through it. It's such an amazing project, and everyone who's watching, I've included a link to the OH expedition Instagram in my bio, so check it out, read back through all the old stuff, go right the way back to the year before and read it through. It's wonderful. And so Tom, thank you so much.
That's all right. It's a pleasure, Joe. Thank you very much for doing this, and everyone should get on board with Publicate Fest, because it is an awesome thing that Joe is doing in lockdown. He's in Dundee right now.
Thank you, Tom.
Just so everyone knows, so they can track him down. Anyway, no, it's been amazing. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for watching. That was great.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back again.